Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today we're going to talk about races. More specifically, the races that are in need of a rework. You see, in Total War Warhammer 3, there's a lot of races and factions. This is because it's the joining of 3 games, and a lot of them do better than others. This is mostly because, content or patches have helped them out for the years, but some of them are actually kind of struggling. Now, I've got over 1,100 hours in Total War Warhammer 3. I've been able to play with all of them, and it's time that we start looking towards what could be changed in the future and what really needs to be fixed up. So we're going to do this, and keep in mind that we're going to focus on this video on the races themselves, not the factions and what flavor is needed for certain factions. So with all that being said, this is going to be kind of like a top-down list, and yeah, let's just begin. We're going to start off with one of probably the least importance, but that would be Britannia. You see, Britannia did get a rework, which kind of fixed up a lot of major issues, but the problem is that the rework itself was just kind of small. While again, yes, it did fix problems, it needed a little bit more flavor just to make Britannia feel like actual Britannia. It still lacks a lot of variety, something along the lines of a crusade mechanic, so you could actually get really special missions to go loot, occupy, or raise settlements in the name of the lady, so it would give you reason to go to different places. Yes, we do have something very similar with the whole questing system, but that just feels like it's tied to a specific character, not to the race. Say, a Bretonnian crusade to the Tomb King's territory. If you know Bretonnian lore, you'll know that crusades were a thing, and they went down to Araby, for example. This was a really big thing to deal with, as Araby was rising in power, and causing a lot of trouble. So the Bretonnian Crusades were started as Araby had been invading, Estalia, Talia, and all those types of areas, and eventually would move up north if left unattended to. The problem is that Britannia doesn't receive a lot of attention, and I think this is because they're an FLC race, and Creative Assembly have hinted towards the possibility of Britannia getting more in the future. But right now, something very big to their culture is not really well associated, and it would be nice if we had that more, where, say, a crusade mechanic could be implemented, which would give you reason to go all the way to the Darklands, not just for a quest to become a Grail Knight or whatever, but to establish a post there. Maybe with the triggering of a crusade to a far-off country, an army of yours would spawn over there, so this would be an army that you'd pay upkeep for and all that, but depending on how you prepared yourself with sending in supplies, rations, and so on, the army might be a stronger tier. It would allow you to spawn there and create a base of operations. There's some other things that could be added in too, like for example, I've been very vocal about wanting the Kizavite Hogwarts mechanic to be added into the Bretonnians too, just for the Fae Enchantress, or in general, so you could then tailor your spellcasters a bit more, because they're supposed to be fairly rare, and this would just make them a tad more special and a bit stronger. While it's been the case that a lot of people don't like mechanics getting overused by different factions, I think in certain cases it works out very well. The perfect example being the fact that the Skaven Undercities were actually originally for the Vampire Coast through the Coves. Next, the Empire, and yeah, there's going to be a lot of a heavy influence early on for the Game 1 races, I'd say. So the Empire did get a rework, and honestly, it's not too bad. The stuff with the whole Electrocounts mechanic I think is kind of cool. The Prestige thing can be a bit of an issue, because right now, there's a lot of problems with the Empire just falling within a few turns, and it already causes you a lot of problems. The Empire's still a fun faction to play, and once you actually push yourself a little bit further, you will get back to the normal Empire that you were used to in Warhammer 2. The only problem is that I still find the Empire a little bit bare. This is a country with many different gods, many different religions, and there is no actual, feeling of that. It's something which I find very strange, considering that anyone who knows the lore knows how important religion is, especially during the Empire. A big basis of what we know for Warhammer the Old World is the fact of the Civil War, which was very heavily themed for religion too. It wasn't just the fact that different provinces wanted to also have a ruling emperor, but they wanted their church to be the dominant one too. I'm just using that time period as a bit of an example because, yeah, it's a common thing, and it still happens every now and then when a new emperor is needed. They use the church to kind of push for that too. But, yeah, a religion mechanic is kind of needed. I feel like it would be really, really cool to get boons from a specific god rather than just an event. It could be a hard-tied mechanic, very similar to that of a Total War Saga Troy, which had a very interesting religion mechanic, and I think something like that would work very well. The fact is that Creative Assembly have been dipping into Troy a lot to get the mechanics, which you will have noticed as a lot of the upgrade stuff is taken from the Amazons DLC, obviously the Kizovite stuff with the game between Constantine and Catherine, that's actually from the Trojan actual mechanic too. So I feel something like this would be really, really good for the Empire, and it would give a generic mechanic to everyone from the Empire, as right now we've got, Karl Franz and Balthazar doing their thing, Volkmar having his own unique thing, which is actually just taken from the vampire counts, and then finally Marcus Wolfhart having his own thing. So why not a standardized mechanic which would basically just unite the Empire more? You've got faith, steel, and gunpowder. This is a big thing, it's a big phrase. So here you could use supplies, and maybe if you had access to certain resources, you could get a bonus for a few turns, faction-wide, or even for a specific province, but it would just be kind of cool if religion played more of a part. And maybe if you did this type of boost, say for example, in the name of Sigmar, then you would get units devoted to Sigmar, like a special regiment of renown with its own unique skin. Same thing with an Ulrichian, or a Morite, or a Talite, just to have something kind of interesting. It's, I know, asking for a lot, but the Empire is one of the most popular factions, so they should deserve a really big thing for them, don't they? Next, the vampire counts, because, look, they've had a rework, yeah, but it's still not enough. We don't have any emphasis on what the vampire counts actually are, other than being von Carsteins. But the thing is that the vampire counts are one of the most varied in terms of culture. They have different bloodlines, which, well, each of the bloodlines are supposed to be drastically different from the other. This is very representative in lore, and around 6th edition, you had different playstyles too, but unfortunately in 7th and 8th that was just kind of removed and it was just generic vampire counts. I've said, and I've been very vocal about this over the past few days and weeks, is that the vampire counts are in desperate need of a Champions of Chaos style DLC, which would then heavily rework the vampire counts in general, where we could have a Strigoi Lord, a Blood Dragon Lord, a Necrarch, a Lemmian. Obviously, it's very easy to guess what characters should be there too, but then make each of the vampire count factions play radically different. If I want to play as a Strigoi, I want to see a heavy emphasis on ghouls, maybe some unique type of ghoul units, and just have something there which kind of plays around in its own form. If you're playing as Von Karstein faction, then there should be heavy emphasis of using some Imperial troops too, not the full roster, and yes, we already have access to some, but it's not enough, as yeah, there was a list back in the day with the whole Storm of Chaos and stuff, where you could play as a kind of mixed faction, and I think that would be kind of cool, as really Vlad is still trying to become Emperor, so it kind of makes sense. Introduce the Red Duke too as a side character, just to have a mix of Bretonnians and undead, so you'd already have the mechanics of the Von Karsteins, but, you know, something kind of new because it's a new roster. The Warriors of Chaos rework and the Champions of Chaos DLC introduced something which I never thought was even possible, and that was to give you reason to play the Warriors of Chaos over and over again, because you have a dedicated style faction now. The replayability for them is absolutely amazing, and I'd love to see this type of rework and DLC format explored for a few other races, not just the vampire counts, but say for example the greenskins too, but the greenskins are still in a very good position. You get what I mean? Having that special type of replayability just makes the game just so much more fun. I'm really enjoying the Warriors of Chaos. Next would be the Lizardmen, and this is something that's become very obvious throughout the lifespan of Warhammer 2, that the Lizardmen were falling behind every other race. Unfortunately, anytime they had a DLC, yeah, it just played against them. The majority of the attention kind of went to someone else, the other faction usually, and it was just a massive shame. Hell, even with the FLCs too, they just felt a little bit bare. We did get a change with that though when Oxyotl was released. So Oxyotl is probably the only Lizardmen faction that I would actively recommend to people, because the faction is just so much more fun. Whereas the Lizardmen right now are in a pretty weird place, because, look, their tech tree is just kind of bad. You need prerequisite buildings, which That takes a while to get your tech up and running, and then you suffer for it. The whole thing with connecting your cities is a little bit better now from a most recent patch, but it's still kind of lackluster. Just in general, the Lizardmen need a lot more flavor, which is really weird considering that the High Elves, the Dark Elves, and the Skaven went into Warhammer 3 in a pretty good place. Yeah, not necessarily in that order, and some things need to change for the Dark Elves and the High Elves, but let's be honest, when you compare them to the Lizardmen, yeah, you get a lot more fun. It's a bit of a weird thing, because there should be more emphasis on loads more blessed spawnings, changing up the tech tree a little bit so it's not just a slog, because that's probably what I hate the most about the Lizardmen at the moment. Just having to get specific buildings to basically unlock everything. There should be some techs that are just open so you can actually get some basic bonuses because, yeah, you know, money does become a bit of an issue at the beginning, especially with how the AI is, where it's declaring war a lot and you're constantly on the battle. You're not spending your cash on building up specific buildings, you're spending your cash on getting armies sorted and getting your usual stuff, defensive stuff, some extra economy so you can field more armies and capture Lustria. It'd also be kind of cool if there was some sort of mechanic really based on deciphering the Great Plan, something like a new window, which you would start trying to decipher it, and each faction would have something different, but it would grant effects faction-wide, or even a massive amount of blessed spawnings. It would just be kind of cool, because it's a big thing with the actual lore of the Lizardmen, yet we get it in a very, very light way, which most people won't even notice. But before we get into the last spot, I just want to say, look, I'm not being negative here. In fact, this game is becoming everything I hoped for and more. And when reworks come into effect, some proper ones, like we've seen for the Beastmen, the Wood Elves, you know, these are absolutely amazing. The Warriors of Chaos one just completely blew my mind. Hell, if we look at the later added races, like for example, Cafe, the Monogods and stuff like that, I don't think any of them need reworks. I think they're all in really good places. Same thing as any races added post Warhammer 2, like for example the Vampire Coast or the Tomb Kings. Very good DLCs. Yes, some of them could do some changes here and there. There needs to be an economy balance for Nurgle, and the Ogre Kingdoms need to be able to have access to building more camps. But the races are fine. All they really need is just a few more units and, you know, Lord options, stuff like that. But that's stuff that you get from DLC, not a rework, so yeah, it's pretty good. And, well, the last spot, as expected, is Norsk. You see, I don't know what to think about them. The recent updates actually made them pretty good. Well, yeah, it's something that it's not enough, let's be honest, but being able to just capture every location just really does make Norsk a lot more fun, because that was something that was very constricting and you just wouldn't be able to expand that much. It just kind of killed off the reason to play them. So yeah, they're better now, but they still need a lot more options. A DLC would be very handy here, and a heavy rework too, just to fix around the mechanics and add some more stuff. Dedication right now just is kind of pointless. I know that it's a big thing with Norsk, but you either get a legendary hero or a legendary lord, well, pseudo-lord, because it's literally just like a great unclean one, or an old version of the Lord of Change. So there needs to be a little bit more emphasis on the Chaos Gods if they are dedicated to making this a proper Chaos faction and not like Chaos Light, like I guess they wanted to originally, where dedicating yourself will start unlocking units from that specific god, or maybe even some demons too at a much rarer rate. Or the best way that it could be done is keep them as a Chaos Light faction without dedicated god mechanics, but this is something I've said in previous videos constantly, change the Norsk name to Northern Tribes, or just Chaotic Tribes, and yeah, make a massive mega roster of all the minor stuff. So you wouldn't just be playing as Norskans, you'd be playing as the Hung, the Kurgan, stuff like that, right? Give it to the point that the Northern Tribes would be a basic mix of factions of all the Northern Tribes. A bunch of sub-races within one big umbrella, very similar to that and how Champions of Chaos worked, essentially, with the 4 God-touched legendary lords, but this would just be playing different playstyles, playing as all the different ones just to have something different, because the problem is Norsk itself is a large country. Yes, Norsk is a large country, but there's only so much that you can do. This would also affect the current stuff because, you know, Wolfric would be the dedicated Norskan lord. Frog could be focused around being an actual monstrous faction lord because, yeah, we need like an actual monster lord too, and have different Norska lords in different start positions. Yes, you could easily have one in, say for example, Skeggi, but I'm talking about having one in the Northern Wastes and one in the Southern Wastes, because it would just be all these different factions that are tied to Chaos but are very much acting in their own way until they get called upon, or better yet said, subjugated by a Chaos Lord to do their bidding. As you can tell from this part of the video, it's not that they just need a rework, it's that they desperately need a DLC too. It's very noticeable. It's very noticeable when you compare them with other factions. And yeah, that's the problem. The race DLCs early on into the series really needed some help. This is very obvious with the Beastmen and hell, even the Wood Elves too. But I still feel like the Wood Elves and the Beastmen, despite their flaws in Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2, still had a more fun and engaging campaign than the Norskans. Even if it's just because of certain units or certain lords, it still felt better. And Norska is just very noticeable as this weird mark on the history of Total War Warhammer at the moment. As, well, you know, we had the issue where they were available prior to Warhammer 2, and then they weren't available for Warhammer 2 for a long time, which I personally was hoping that they were going to update Norska, maybe just to kind of make them feel a little bit better, because they were marketed as a pre-order incentive for Race 2, yet they didn't feel like a Race 2 race. I can't wait to see what they have planned. They clearly must have something planned by this point to fix up Norska. After Norska gets a fix, then all the others will just basically need a few fixes here and there, barring the Lizardmen. They do need a quite heavy rework, I'd say. And then, yeah, everyone will be in a pretty good location. It's just minor fixes here and there, and we can focus more on DLC than reworks. Imagine when we get to a point where reworks won't be needed for races, so the dev time could be focused more on DLC. I imagine that the DLC would be even better than what we're already getting. Well, we're going to have to wait and see, though. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what races you think need the reworks the most. And let's start a bit of a discussion.